I see education generally, and coming down to the chalk face, that very personal experience of delivering and experiencing education myself, as a pathway to social justice. So I still see education as a social equaliser rather than solely what in some frameworks might be seen as a tool of economic reconstruction. The project that I undertook as part of a Flexible Learning Institute fellowship back in 2009 was to take a first-year sociology subject called Social Inequality, which was considerably out of date, and these sorts of concepts are changing all the time. So the task that I had on board was to completely overhaul the content in what we would call a Category 4 review, but injecting into that a very transformative blended learning design with subject level blending and activity level blending. The first delivery, again, contextual constraints always interfere with what should be a perfect design. The numbers that I had designed the subject for of about 100 more than doubled within 2 weeks of prior to the subject actually being taught in the second session. That's problematic because a learning design needs to cater for the actual size of the group. Nevertheless, I pushed on and had around 260 students engaged in both online, both internal and distance education students working together, and that's significant in a topic like social inequality, getting a range of views from mature age students who've experienced life, as well as those who are perhaps younger with not such a rich experience of life, putting them together in teams, virtual teams, online. Expectation was originally there'd be about 6 to a team. It turned out to be about 12 to 14. It's now been 18 months, so it's now been delivered on another 2 occasions, and it's changed and evolved from that initial process. I was quite surprised by the quality of work coming from students. The social learning environment was so powerful at stimulating them, at engaging them, at creating an environment in which they felt comfortable to discuss issues and that they were involved, that the quality of work, particularly in their teamwork, was quite exceptional. I was really quite surprised. The pedagogy that underpins my learning and teaching comes back to Big's constructive alignment. So I'm looking at sequential learning, structuring learning experiences, and building assessment experiences into that, which progressively build an understanding of the subject. Within the first delivery of the subject, I tried to create a number of spaces for different purposes, for different types of interaction. So for the first time I used a chat room. Now I declared that to be a student space, that I would not be responding to questions in that chat room. It was for them to have a social interaction, to have a whinge if they wanted to, that was fine, because I wasn't going to go onto that site, and that was their domain. However, having said that, the interaction between me and them in the chat room was that I always manage that space, and the first posting into chat room was from me, setting some basic guidelines as to how they might interact with each other in a mutually respectful way. The learning management system that we're operating here in the university is a Sakai system, which we refer to as Interact. I prefer to just use Interact rather than using a range of other ICT such as Skype, social networking sites. I think it's a challenge for many students, particularly mature age students, particularly for women who have limited access to IT technology, particularly if they're in domestic roles. This is what they're telling me, that this is a whole new world for them. So to try and contain it within one site seems to be a very positive experience for students. in terms of describing the spaces that I learn in learning and teaching, I will try and divide them into what I will call classroom spaces, where a formal interaction is taking place between academic teacher and students. I'll try and create spaces for students to interact with each other, and there will be also other spaces where all of us get together in terms of learning spaces. So for example, wikis were a really good space to use for that. So in team assessment, I created project team sites for each team. So there were about 24 of those. And they had all of the functions and spaces of a chat room, of a wiki space within their own project site, announcements. So they basically controlled the site of their own project team. However, when they came back onto the main wiki site for the subject, they would post the outcomes, the outputs of their seminar up there for everyone to interact. The literacies that both I as an academic teacher need and my students need to be able to operate in this space is quite complex. It's complex in a number of dimensions, technically, but also in terms of experience and confidence. So for many mature age students coming to an online virtual learning environment, irrespective of their technical know-how, it is a question of their confidence to actually engage it. So that needed to be tackled in the first instance. And it's very good for me as a neophyte coming to this, actually being able to give them step-by-step instructions as I too find out how to do these things. So going through the journey of learning together how to operate within the spaces, I think was a great advantage. Although might I say that students are very helpful if we have enough social spaces open for them to assist each other. They are just great at helping each other with the technology. So from an academic teacher's perspective, enormous potential for creativity, for stimulation for us, which is great, but the time constraint, which of course cuts across our conditions of employment, because this is employment, and there are a certain number of hours a week that we are employed for. It has the potential to extend beyond that. We just have to keep control of that. And in subsequent deliveries, I've actually had to pull back from some of the original learning designs. There just isn't enough time and resourcing to do what one would ideally like to do in pedagogical terms. If we want to extend education across the board, not just to metropolitan Australia where high-speed broadband is available, we need to ensure that those students who are in rural and remote Australia can access our material. And for that reason, I try and present the material in hard copy transcripts of lectures, in CD-ROM of lectures, presented in a variety of forms throughout the spaces.